Each year, athletes from across the globe converge on Haines City, Florida, test the limits of their bodies and the resilience of their spirits at Ironman Florida 70.3. This documentary invites you behind the scenes of an athlete's return to triathlon after a forced 4-year hiatus, a story of grit, ambition, and unwavering dedication. From early morning swims to relentless training rides beneath the hot and humid summer sun and pounding footfalls on winding roads, we will witness the evolution of a competitor with a humble and grateful heart striving for redemption. But this is more than a race. It is a voyage through adversity and triumph. Through moments of doubt and bursts of inspiration, there will be setbacks and surprises, victories large and small, and the discovery of the true meaning of perseverance. Join us as we chronicle the milestones and missteps, the sweat and celebration culminating in one unforgettable day. This will not only be a tale of athletic determination, but a portrait of the human spirit, undaunted, unbreakable, and ever reaching for the extraordinary. Welcome to Ironman Florida 70.3, an endurance athlete's journey. Welcome, everyone. This is Ironman Florida 70.3, an endurance athlete's journey. I'm your host, Coach Justin from Tabula, Rasa Racing. This is week 5 of the prep for Ironman Florida 70.3. And so this week, I'm going to talk about how my training went with swim, bike, and run and the strength, some of my insights that I gained over the week. Let's just jump right on in. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. First of all, I'm 31% through the training plan. And so I'm really thankful and grateful to everyone who continues to watch the videos. These episodes are also being released on the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm releasing them as bonus episodes, so it doesn't replace our normal content that we come out with. And so I started from the introduction and I've loaded in, I think, up to like week 2. So I'm trying to push them out fairly quickly so that we get caught up, so that it will just be basically 2 episodes a week with the bonus cast. So if we get to the point and you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, that'd be great. It's available on iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, wherever you would listen to your podcasts. And so this will also be available. So let's start off. It was a pretty successful week. So I had a total planned volume, I'm just kind of staring at my notes here, of 18 hours and 10 minutes. So this was a bit of a bump up this week. Typically, this training plan is done in 2-week blocks. So for 2 weeks, the volume kind of stays the same and I just kind of tweak intensity. But this week it was a bump up in volume, so a bump up in duration. So now we're at 18 hours and 10 minutes. I had a total completed volume of 18 hours and 34 minutes. So this was a heavy volume kind of week. Where it's coming from, where the extra time came from, I was a little bit long on my planned swim durations. I do my swim workouts in distance, in yards, but I also put in an expected time of completion on how long it should take me so that it does get counted into like my weekly total training volume time. So if you look through on the website, you'll see every single week's detailed training plan along with a summary of what I did for each of the main disciplines. And so if you look through, the times won't add up specifically because of the swim component. That all I do is I put the duration, I put the distance of the swim in the summary file, but I don't indicate like how much time I had planned that I set aside for the swim. So that's where that came from. I was a little short on strength this week. I ended up missing 2 of my core sessions. I have 3 core sessions and they're a week and they're 20 minutes in duration. I was just time limited this week, and so those did not get done. I wasn't too happy about that, but it wasn't much that I could do, but I did the best that I could this week. And so I did get in 1 of the core sessions, but I missed the other 2. So that's a nice little wrap-up 1,000-foot view of what my training volume was like. So let's dive into each of the components. So let's start with the run component. So this was a nice bump up in weekly miles this week. I got in some additional intensity as well. So I kind of tweaked a little bit of the structure of some of the workouts, but it was basically the moderate workout that I did add some progressions in there to try and increase some intensity. I still stuck with the 5-minute run intervals. So I think it was a 5 by 1.5 and then a 5 by 2.5 was the structure. But like I said, you can go on to the Tabula Rasa Racing website. There's a page dedicated there to Ironman Florida 70.3. If you scroll down towards the bottom of the page, you'll see each week's detailed workouts. If you scroll a little bit past like the photo gallery, each week has its own section, but below that you can download the PDF files. So, each week has a PDF file, and it's just going to be the photo gallery that is present on the website. So you can download those if you would like, and you can see the detail of the workouts. So I did a lot more of my training volume outside this week. With me being in the office more now, unfortunately, it makes life more complicated. I'm also down to one car this week. I had to put my car in the shop, so we were just down to the one vehicle and trying to get back and forth to the gym and being able to take my wife to work and, pick her up. It was too much. So I ended up doing a lot of my runs outside just for time's sake, for logistics sake. I'm actually really surprised on how my body held up over the week, because typically running a lot more outside does kind of wear on me a little bit. And, my feet tend to hurt a little bit more, the ankles and the Achilles tends to get a little flared up, basically just because of how, your foot strike on the road. It's not flat like it is on the treadmill where it's predictable, but on the road, the camber of the road, so it's the slope of the road, isn't flat all the time. So you're not really hitting it flat footed, and, you're kind of like hitting it at an angle, and that can put a little bit of wear and tear and stress on the ankles, especially if you have issues like I have with some of the tendons that are in my ankles and the Achilles. So I'm actually really surprised on how well my feet held up. I am, doing some of my therapies and things like that, the recovery therapy with the Normatec, doing some of, I don't believe I got any of the percussion therapy done this week, but I am, doing some hand massage and stuff like that. So just trying to keep them fairly healthy. I do wear some of the plantar fasciitis sleeves and things like that, and the calf sleeves when I sleep, especially for my elbows. And that keeps, it takes some of the tension off, especially at night. And so I wake up in the morning, I'm feeling a little bit better. So that seems to be working for me. So I'm going to try and keep up with that as much as I possibly can. But, this was a pretty solid week. I got some additional miles because of the additional intensity and some slight added duration. Typically, as a coach, I wouldn't prescribe increasing intensity and duration at the same time, but I knew that my body could handle it because I structured the workouts in such a way that it wasn't an overload. It wasn't too much of an increase in stress and intensity, but the intensity were progressions, but I still kind of kept them, still like zone 3 and below. I never kind of like dipped into kind of like the zone 4 range. So I believe that it was still a responsible way to increase intensity while at the same time increasing duration. So like I said, I enjoyed it. I think that I've kind of reached the point now where I really love this 5-minute interval, this 5-minute run interval. I feel completely in control, and I'm able to execute the higher intensities, and it's just a nice little sweet spot for me. But like I said, I'm gonna shake things up a little bit next week, but this week I still kept the 5-minute intervals and really liked it, and it worked really, really well. So I'm making a mental note. I'm putting notes in my training journals to remind that I really like so that is a potential race day plan, especially when I have the half marathon that's going to be coming up in November. I still haven't decided on whether I'm going to execute that race or use it basically as a training run. Doing a half marathon as a training run would put a lot of stress on my body, especially run right now. And so I'm still kind of apprehensive about it. So I'm not quite sold on what it is that I'm going to do yet with that. I'm still thinking it through. There's still quite a bit of time left before I really kind of like have to make a decision, but I can't defer it again because it was already deferred once. So if I don't do it, I got to eat the loss. Either that or I drop down to the 8K, which is an option, but I'm still kind of leaning more towards doing the half and just using it as kind of a test, a race day strategy test and test out what kind of interval I'm going to use for Florida. I think that kind of sums up the run for the week. Nothing really over exciting, doing these kind of races, I would say the bulk of workouts are kind of just ordinary, you know, especially when it comes to endurance sports. So if you think that, you have to come up with these grand, all these complicated workouts and they have to be different like week over week, I can tell you right now that I don't do personally. I don't do that. I like doing the same workouts over and over because it allows me to kind of develop a feel for the workout and it allows me to compare workouts, so I can see either progressions or regressions and things that I kind of want to work on. So there's really a good benefit to using the same workouts. But some of them is just, you just kind of check the box and you got it done. There's a little bit that you might be able to walk away from is like, hey, this is how I was feeling. And I do that with all my work. I write pretty detailed comments when it's called for. I do write something for every single workout that I do, just as kind of like a reminder, how it went and how I felt, some of my some summary performance metrics, if I feel like it's relevant. But it's just a good practice to get used to doing. I encourage my athletes because honestly, I get more out of the comments than I do the actual performance metrics for my athletes and for myself. So the numbers are what they are, but really the qualitative comments that you get that accompany a workout really provides more insight and more details on how you're doing than just looking at what was your pace, what was your heart rate, what was your cadence, and all this kind of stuff. Just the quantitative stuff, that is what it is, and it can be impacted by all kinds of different factors. But the qualitative stuff is really, really helpful. So that was the end of the run week. But let's roll on to the bike. This week I had a nice bump in duration in the bikes. I was up to I think it was an executed of 7 hours and 41 minutes of bike training this week. I tried a new big gear session and it was ambitious. And so I got done with the first interval. And so just to give you a little bit of background on it, I mean, you can see the structured workout, on the website, but I'll tell you a little bit about it. So they were 11-minute big gear intervals, 11 minutes sustained effort, zone 4 with a cadence of 50 to 55 target. And so what I had originally planned to do is for that 11 minutes at minute 3, 6, and 9, I was going to do a hill sprint. And so what that effectively meant is I would come out of the saddle and I would just ride as hard as I could for a minute from 3 to 4 and then 6 to 7 and then 9 to 10. And, I would basically get into zone 5. My cadence was really, really high. And so what I discovered, I did it once. And I think there were like a total of 4 intervals. And I knew after the first one that I wasn't going to be able to sustain that level of effort and still execute a good workout. So I made an adjustment on the fly and moved it to just minute 3 and 9, where I did the hill sprint. It was hard. It was a hard workout, and it cooked the legs a little bit, but I got exactly what it is that I wanted out of it. I wanted to raise the intensity of my big gear session, really kind of like tap into that muscular endurance and really stress the muscle out, and then kind of like not deload it, but go back to a nice steady climb and then spike it again. I mean, obviously I wouldn't do that in a race for long course racing. Short course racing, you might be able to get away with that kind of effort, but not long course. And so, comparing my average power and my normalized power for those big gear intervals you're going to get a big spread between those because you're really spiking that power, in those 60-second intervals. I do like that structure, so I think I'm going to actually stick it in the library. But I just know that I was not ready for the 3 by 1 minute efforts within the 11-minute interval. So I'm not there yet, but doesn't mean that I can't get there. So I'm going to stick with it and keep going. I liked the result that I got out of it. So there was no gravel bike ride this week. Today is Sunday. This is Sunday evening. It's about 9:23 p.m. on Sunday when I'm recording this. Normally today I would do my endurance swim and a gravel bike ride, but no gravel biking today. Yesterday we got a lot of rain in this area. I assume that the trails are going to be really sloppy, and it wasn't worth the risk for me, in terms of like, what would happen if I fell or anything like that. I'm not willing to jeopardize, my progress just for just one workout. B, I didn't want to tear up the trails any more than would be necessary because they probably were wet and slushy, and that's just not the right thing to do. And so I transitioned and turned it into an indoor ride, and I got some good, solid, big gear efforts because that's kind of really what I'm aiming for when I do the gravel riding. I am getting a lot of hill climbs where I'm riding, so I really kind of wanted to keep that component in there because that's why I wanted to do it. And so that's why I threw in another big gear session. So it was called the Big Gear Pyramid. And so it goes 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 6, 5, 4. And so that it's just up the pyramid and then back down. 1 minute breaks in between each of those efforts. So but still it's zone 4, cadence 50 to 55 target, and I enjoyed it. I don't get very many workouts where there's a nice puddle of sweat on the floor after the session, but I had to wipe up the floor this time, and so that was a pretty solid effort. I'll tell you I'll tell you the story that's behind the long ride this week, because it is quite the story. And but I'm going to save that for the insight segment of this video because it definitely is worth telling. So I won't talk about it right now. So next is my swim. I have 3 swim workouts, like in the plan. My Tuesday swim is still plaguing me. I don't know if it's just the way that I'm feeling and the cumulative fatigue that I'm going into that workout with, but I don't like the structure of the workout. When I created the workout, I thought, and that was when I had like some intensity efforts in there. So I kept the intervals fairly short. They were like 100-yard efforts, but they had intensity in there. So there was like descending efforts by 25s, and then it was, all kinds of different combinations of hard efforts with some easy swimming. But when I removed them, I still kept the 100 yards and just kind of like moved things around to where, I was swimming in some, and then I was using the pull buoy and others, and swimming with paddles, swimming with pull buoy and paddles. So I was always kind of like changing things out like for every 100. And so I don't know if that's really kind of like just dragging the workout on as I have to make these transitions all the time. Plus, I'm pretty tired kind of going into the workout. And so I may not be, as purposeful with my recoveries and maybe letting them linger a little bit. I tend to pause my watch during those recoveries. So that time that I'm spending recovering is not being counted as like my swim time, quote unquote, my swim time. So, when I say my Tuesday swim, I had an actual swimming time, like moving time of 54 minutes. My watch said that I swam for an hour and 9 minutes. So I had some pauses in there that were captured. And a lot of them were just kind of like during my warm-ups, because I do some short little warm-ups just to kind of engage the muscles a little bit, and there's some recoveries in between those efforts. But typically I'll pause it so that it doesn't capture. But I was actually in the water for an hour and 38 minutes. So that means that out of 54 minutes of moving time, I had 44 minutes that are not accounted for in the workout. That is a long time to be in the water, of like almost an hour and 40 minutes on a weeknight. And that's just not working for me. It puts me home too late, and it pushes dinner out, and it's hard to kind of get to bed at a reasonable hour and be able to do other stuff as well. I typically will come home and have to do coaching stuff and business stuff, after working all day. And then after all the training sessions are completed, I am working on bringing a triathlon training team to a local gym. So I kind of want to start up this team. And so I'm kind of having to do like kind of the business plan and the pricing and everything else, and kind of come up with all the details for the team. And so I did a little bit of that this week. And so when you're getting home that late, it makes it hard to be productive as well. So this week I'm changing things up a little bit with my swim. I'm going to increase those intervals. So I think I'm going to go from hundreds to 250s. Those are a nice manageable effort of 250 yards per interval. And it's still less than the interval lengths of my other swim workouts. So it's still like quote unquote lower volume or lower stress workout, but hopefully these longer intervals will help move the workout a little bit move it along a little bit quicker, and it'll keep me more engaged. And I don't quite know, but I need to do something about that because it's not really working for me. I had a good Friday swim. I actually swam in the morning, first thing in the morning on Friday, just for timing and for logistics and scheduling. But it was my pull and paddle session, and those were 300s, and I swam well. My intervals were really consistent, and so there wasn't any kind of like, degradation in pace. They were all kind of like right around the same time, which tells me that I swam smooth and controlled and consistent, and it felt really, really good. It was a big boost of confidence. And my endurance swim was today. Those were 700s. And it was a longer swim. Total volume for that swim was a 3,200. So it was a 3.2K swim with some 700 efforts and a couple 250s in there, just to get me up to the 3,200. But they were nice. It was a really nice swim, and I was really surprised on how I felt. I felt smooth and control. This was a really big boost in confidence for my swim. So I'm getting some better mobility in my shoulder when I do my pre-swim, like dry land stretches and things like that. I can notice that I'm able to get my arm in positions that I couldn't get it in just a matter of like a month ago. So, the mobility in the shoulder is improving. The strength in the shoulder is improving. I'm getting a better pull through the water. I'm still not able to breathe to the weaker side yet. So, I can't do bilateral breathing, which is when you breathe to both sides. I can't do it because I can't get my right arm to fully stretch out and roll and rotate at the same time. So if I do that, my hand drops in the water and I lose power. And so I'm not able to get a solid breath, and I can't get a good pull through the water as a result of it. So I'm still breathing to the one side, but it is improving. So I can feel like a nice catch. I can get that early vertical forearm and just pull through the water. So that's something that I couldn't do just a matter of, several months ago. So that is progress. Let's move along to the strength side. So I had my 3 strength sessions. I only got one of my core sessions in there this week. So there were some progressions in weight this week as a result of successful tests from last week. So what I do is I have a goal rep count for most of the movements of 15 to 20. And you can see in the workouts, they'll have the goal targets for each of the movements that are out there on the website. You can see those. If I get to the point where that last set, I'm able to test to see if I can get to 20 reps and still be in decent control, then I'll increase the progression. So that means that if I do 4 sets, then I'll increase weight for all 4 of those sets and then go back to like the target of 15 reps. I go for the 15 reps and then test that last set for 20 reps. And that's when I'm testing to see if I can increase my weight. So last week I had a couple successful tests, so I increased the progression this week and trying to hit those 15 reps. A couple of them I came a little bit short, and so I know that, yes, I was ready to increase the weight, but I'm still not there to where I can hit my rep goals. So I'll continue. I'll just stay there until I can hit those the minimum 15 reps for those movements, and then I'll test again. I had a couple movements where I was testing for that 20 rep max in the 4th set, and I came up short on them. So I'll test again. I don't know if I'm going to test again next week, as I'll explain what next week is going to be like. those tests have not been passed yet, so I need to retest and see if I can those. So overall, I think I had a challenging week with the one car drama. I was hoping to get my car back today, but unfortunately, I have not received a call from the shop saying that it is ready. But I had a successful training week. I prioritized sleep. There were a couple times where, I had intended to get up a little bit earlier, but when the alarm went off, it just wasn't happening. I was like, what? If I get up now, the quality of my workouts are going to suffer because of it, because I'm still pretty tired. So let's just go ahead and get a little bit more extra sleep, and we'll make adjustments accordingly to the workouts and how I got them done. But everything was still good and accomplished. So overall, this was a successful week of training for Ironman Florida. So here are the insights that I got from this week. And it all stems from the story that is from my long ride this week. So my long ride was on Saturday, and it was a goal ride of 3 hours, 45 minutes with a 40-minute run pre-bike. And so again, those runs are run walk interval protocols. I had 3 hours and 45 minutes planned on the bike. Before I left that morning, I checked the radar because it said that it was supposed to rain. But the trailhead, the segment of the trail where I ride, and this is it's on the Capitol Trail, so it's a paved multi-use trail system that spans between Richmond, Virginia and Williamsburg, Virginia. And I like the trail because I don't have to deal with cars, and it's an easy point to point, and there's limited thinking that's involved. I still have to pay attention, but not as much as like trying to find routes on the road and loops and stuff like that. I know that I can just ride point to point and it works. And where I typically will ride is a significant distance from my house. So it takes me about 40 to 45 minutes to get to where I start my ride. And so I looked on the radar. I didn't look at the forecast, but I looked on the radar, and there was all the rain was to the west of where I was going to be, which is where I live. So I was like, well, even though it's raining here, it looks like where I will be is going to be fairly dry. So I'm still going to go. Packed up all my stuff and headed out, got to the trail, started my run, and it started to sprinkle while I was on the run. And so I was like, okay, well, I can deal with sprinkling. I mean, that's no big deal for me. But it started to get a little bit heavier and more persistent. So I was like, okay, well, that's how this day is going to go. And so I finished the run, and it was a pretty successful one. Not as good as it was last week, but I still executed it well. I saw a nice progression in my pace. So I got faster and faster as the run progressed. And I think it was an overall successful run. And so I got the bike off the rack and, started setting my stuff up, put on my hydration and nutrition stuff on there, and got my clothes together. And so I started out on the ride, and it was raining. It was sprinkling. I'll say it was a little heavy sprinkle. So it really wasn't like raining yet. And I got out there, and then it started to rain a little heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier. And then it turned into like real rain. And so I said, well, this is going to be one of those workouts where I'm going to get more out of it mentally than I am physically. So there's a story from when I was in graduate school, and I talk about this on like one of the podcast episodes that I don't think it's been released yet. We just recorded it on Friday, on Saturday. So it'll be coming out. But the story behind it is when I was in graduate school, I was writing my master's thesis, and there was a professor who was not my advisor. I trusted him greatly, and I said, will you read what I've done so far? He said, absolutely. So he read it. He invited me over to his house, which is not a common thing that would happen. But he was one of those professors that he was a rarity. And, to this day, he remains a significant figure in my life. And we were sitting in his study in his home, and he said, all right, now I'm getting ready to steal you. And this is STEEL. And he said, the feedback that I'm going to give you is if this is the course that you want to go on, and my intention was to go forward and get my PhD and everything else. But he said, I'm going to toughen you up a little bit. So you need to be able to take, constructive criticism and take this and move forward, because this is how you get better. So we're going to toughen you up a little bit. So I understood. And when he gave me back the paper, it was just full of red ink everywhere. And so I was like, well, I've been writing this paper for months and months. And so I said, okay. But the phrasing that he used is, this is a stealing moment for you. I still use that phrasing to this day. And this is one of those workouts, and I've had many workouts where they were stealing workouts, where it was designed to, where the purpose that you got out of it was to get your mind to go someplace else and disregard and discount, not disregard, but discount the conditions that you're in, whether those are hot conditions and humid conditions, or it's raining, or it's cold, or it's snowing and things like that. You know, allowing your mind to go someplace else so that you don't focus on the conditions that you're in, which makes things even harder. And so, this is going to be one of those workouts that I needed to do, even though my speed was going to be less, my miles were going to be less, and on paper, it would be a lesser performance. Not everything, performance isn't everything. So there's a mental side to endurance sports. And this was going to be one of those workouts where it was going to be more mental than it was going to be physical. So I got about an hour in to the ride, and I wasn't where I usually am at about an hour. And so I was fighting off those negative thoughts too. I was like, man, I must be going a lot slower than I feel like I'm going, but just forget it. That's not the point of this workout. We're out here in the rain, and I have to go slower because of the trail. And I don't want to like run over walnuts and stuff and really kind of like, really risk injury, while on this bike. And so by that time, I was about an hour and 12 into the session, and something just felt off on the bike. It felt sluggish. I felt a lot of vibrations coming up through the seat post and into the seat, and I could feel it in my feet. And I was like, something isn't right. So I stopped the bike, got off of it. And because I was feeling vibrations in the pedals and in my seat, I thought, well, there must be something that's going on with my back tire. So I looked, there were no broken spokes. The tire was still fully inflated, and there was nothing that was hindering the drivetrain or anything like that. It looked like completely normal. So I said, well, maybe it's just the segment of the trail that I'm riding is rough, and that's where I'm feeling the vibration. So I got back on the bike, and I was only on there for like another minute. And I said, no, something is not right. This isn't the trail. And then I looked at my front tire. My front tire had gone flat. And so I said, well, I wasn't expecting this. This is good practice. And these are like the tires that I have on there now. They're effectively brand new. I put them on as brand new racing tires in my last race. So the only miles that these tires have is from that race and what I've done to date for this training plan. So after that race, I put the road bike in the shed and then popped out the gravel bike and was on the gravel bike for that whole time. So there's hardly any miles on these really expensive race tires. But the tires are so hard to get on and off that after the race was done, I didn't feel like it was worth the effort to like take the tires off and save them for the next race and then just put on some training tires. So I just left them on there. So I said, well, this is good practice. So I got half the tire off. I pulled out the tube. And so I was like, well, that came off a little bit easier than I thought it was going to, because getting these tires on is an ordeal. It is horrible. And one of the reasons that I may not buy these tires ever again, because they were so hard to get on. But I started to, look and see how I can get this new tube in. So I pulled the tube out of my bike kit and stuff. And I have a carbon wheel set. And so the back tire has a thicker carbon inset than the front tires. It's like 65 millimeters in the front, 95 millimeters in the back. But the valve stem from the tube that I have was just enough to where it was peeking out of the carbon inset in the wheel. And so I said, well, I need to put on my valve extenders. So it's these little metal pieces that basically you take the valve core out of the stem from the tube, you put on the extender, and then you put the core back into the extender. So it just extends the stem so it can get through the carbon inset. And so I fought, and I could not get the core out of the valve stem. And I didn't have the little tool. I have a little tool to do that. But I had all the pieces that I needed except for this one little freaking tool that I did not have. And by the way, it's still raining. I only have one car, and I took it to go on the ride. So I called my wife, and we're sitting there trying to figure out, like, how is it that I'm going to either get back to the car, or how is she going to get to where I am to get me, because I was stuck. I couldn't fix the tire. I didn't have the tools that I needed to be able to do it. And I wasn't too far away from this other trailhead where there's like a small little restaurant and things like that. So I said, well, let me just figure this out, because I was starting to get frustrated and I didn't want to take it out on her. So I was like, let me just figure this out, because I was like 20 miles away from my car. So it's not like I could just walk it back. And we live 40 to 45 minutes away from that trailhead, and I was already 20 miles beyond that. And so there's no way that she could have, like, gotten an Uber and had not spent like a small fortune to come out and get me. So I walked a little ways onto the trail, and there's like this little church that's there, and I can see the restaurant just not too far down the road. And so there's this guy in this truck, and he pulled right up to me, and he said, do you need any help? And I said, do you have a pair of pliers in your truck? Because if I can get some pliers, I can remove the valves, the core from the stem, and be able to do what it is that I needed to do. And he said, no, unfortunately. He's like, this is a work truck, and I don't even have a pair of pliers. He's like, this is kind of embarrassing. And come to find out, he was on the board of the Capitol Trail, which is the trail that I'm on. He's on the board for this. So, pretty important guy, actually. And so he said, no, throw your bike in the back. I'll take you to the restaurant, because I know they have tools. And the rest, I could walk to the restaurant. But at this point, I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I put my bike in the back. He let me sit in his cab. And I said, dude, I'll sit in the back because I'm soaking wet. I've been outside now for over an hour in the driving rain. He's like, no, I got good seat covers. Come on in. So I sat down. We turned around, drove to the restaurant. Pulled into the restaurant, and I took my bike out, set it on the side, and I said, well, and so we walked into the restaurant, and they're like, we don't know if we have pliers or not, but they found a pair of pliers. So I was like, perfect. This is all I need. I really appreciate it. So I grabbed the pliers. I got the core removed. I got the valve extenders on. I got the valve extender onto the stem, and then put the core back in. And so I was ready to reinflate. But first I had to get the tube back into the tire, and then set the tire back onto the rim, which I was not looking forward to this process, because I remember what it was like to try and get these freaking tires on the rim to begin with. And I'm tired, and I'm wet, and I'm cranky, and I'm only an hour and 12 into a 3 hour and 45 minute bike ride. So I still had a lot to go. And I'm working the tire onto the rim, and that's when I see it. It was a slash in the actual tire itself. And it's not that, my tube popped, but the tire got cut, and I was just deflated then. I was like, well, it doesn't matter now if I can get the tube in, because as soon as I pump it up, it's going to pop again, because the slice in the tire is going to pinch it. And, hitting the slightest little thing could cause another flat. And I only have one tube left. So I said, well, I don't really know kind of like what I'm going to do now, because I'm definitely not going to be able to get back on this bike. And this couple comes walking in, kind of a younger, maybe just a little bit younger than me, but they had a really small kid. They're saying like, hey, what's up? And so I was telling them the whole story on what was going on. And they looked at each other and were just like, well, we'll drive you back to 4 Mile Creek, which is kind of like where my car was. And I was like, are you serious? I was like, it's like 20 miles away. And I was like, I don't want to interrupt your lunch. It looks like you guys are, out having a good time with the families. No, we were going out to kind of like this other little festival. Come to find out, it's rained out and we didn't know it. And so we've got no plans. We were just walking in here and just, to have some lunch. But they're like, honestly, we're not all really that hungry either. And I said, well, by the way, have the pimento cheese sandwiches. It's incredible. This place is really, really good. And so they say, well, thanks for the recommendation. He's like, we'll drive you. And so I was like, well, I was speechless already, because these people who didn't know me from Adam was willing to allow me into their car, drive me for 20 miles in the driving rain, and then drive 20 miles back to the restaurant to finish off their day. I was speechless. And so they're like, yeah, sure, it's no problem. He's like, we've been in this kind of we've been in your situation before, so we understand what it's like, and so we're willing to help you. And so I was eternally grateful. So I got the bike loaded into the car, and got in the car. The wife is who drove me to the trailhead, and the husband stayed behind with the little kid. So I assume that, the look, give the kid something to eat and, keep him occupied and engaged. And the wife was willing to drive. Drove me back, and we had a nice conversation because it was quite a while in the car talking, and we knew some of the same people. And she was like, I've been a runner, and I do like mountain biking. It's like, I've always wanted to do a triathlon. And she's like, are you training for anything? I was like, well, yeah, by the way, actually, I'm training for Ironman Florida 70.3. She's like, oh, where is it? And I was like, Haines City, Florida. It's in December. And they're like, have you done anything like that before? And I was like, well, I've done 2 full Ironmans, and this will be my 9th half Ironman. And so we got into like this nice long conversation, and it was really pleasant. And so we got to the trail, we got back to my car, and I started to unload, everything out of her car. And I was speechless. And I told her, I was like, at this day and age, you don't meet people like you ever, who was willing to do something like this for somebody else. And she was like, well, we're out there. And I can honestly say that I've kind of turned into kind of like this a cynical person. Unfortunately, I'm not reassured by humankind. But this experience kind of made me feel it's like, well, there are some people out there that are not who we see the majority of on social media. That there are good and kind and giving people and sacrificial people that are out there. And so I was just kind of just thinking about this. And so my insight is from this week is that this is God's provision. There have been a number of times where I've lost a job or, something like that wasn't from my doing. And God has always provided a replacement, or he's provided what I've needed to sustain me through that time period until something came along. So on this experience, on this bike ride, he brought 2 people into my path when they were needed, not when I wanted them to be present, because honestly, I didn't want anybody because I didn't want this situation to begin with. So it's not that he kept me from a trying situation or a challenging situation. He allowed the situation to take place because he was bringing 2 people into my path that would make me reconsider kind of like mankind a little bit. So to notice that he is still in control. He provides what's needed when it's needed, and he doesn't keep us from trying situations. He allows the trying situations to take place because then he's going to use those situations to grow you. And this is what we do in training. Our purpose to training is to stress the body to build adaptation. Without stress, there's no adaptation. The same goes for our spiritual lives. Without stress, there's no growth and there's no adaptation. And so, this situation that I experienced during my long ride, while challenging and while unfortunate and something that I wish I could have avoided, it brought about a growing moment for me in my journey. And so I am thankful for the situation. And I'm thankful to the 3 people that God brought into my path that day when I needed them. And the funny thing is that I came home after this whole ordeal, and I got home, I put my bike I walked into the shed of my bike or with my bike and put my bike up on the mechanic stand, and I changed that tire out. I put on one of my old junk tires because it was on the front tire. So it's not that big of a deal. And I got the bike all prepped, and I brought it into the house. I put my bike on the trainer. My bike is like right here, actually right beside me. I put my bike on the trainer, and I finished the workout. So, after being outside and like almost for an hour and 13 minutes, I still had 3 hours and 45 minutes. So I came home and I looked into my Training Peaks library and found a workout that I could do that would be the balance of my workout, and then loaded it into the bike computer and then executed that workout. So if you actually go into the workouts for this week and you look at the Saturday bike segment, you'll see like an hour and 13 outdoors, indoor session, and you'll see the details of that workout. So I came home and I was like, I'm not going to be beaten. I'm not going to be swayed. I am motivated. This was a challenging situation, but I'm not going to let it derail me, and I will not be beaten. And so I got on the bike and finished off the 3 hours and 45 minutes in duration. It put me basically at like 5 o'clock in the evening, which is super late for a Saturday, especially when I started my day. I started my training day at like 8 or 9. And so it was a super long day. And I was supposed to record the next podcast episode at 5:30 with my co-host. And so I had to we were supposed to record at 5, but I had to tell her, I was like, hey, can we move this to like 5:30? There's a story behind it, I promise you. So she was gracious enough to say, yeah, let's just do it at 5:30. And so I told her the story on why I needed the flexibility. But I got it all done. I got my workouts in, I got the podcast recorded, and enjoyed some pizza and a movie in the evening. So that's the insights that I have from week 5, and it boils down to God's provision. He'll provide what's needed when it's needed, even though it doesn't line up necessarily with our timetable, but he does use these situations to grow us. And without the stress and the challenges, there's no growth and there's no adaptation. And that applies to all things in life. So that's it. That's it for week 5. Week 5 is a wrap. So now next week is week 6. So next week is actually a rollback week. So the reason that we put in these rollbacks is it's not necessarily a recovery week, and it's not necessarily a taper kind of thing, but you do shed some volume to allow the body to kind of like rest up a little bit. You typically will still keep kind of the intensity, but what I'll do is I'll roll back the duration 25% is kind of what my rule of thumb is. So my aerobic volume in minutes will reduce by 25%. For the strength side, I keep the number of reps for the target, but what I do is I look at the weight that I lift in the 4th set for each movement and say that's my max. I decrease that by 25%, and and I put that in as that's the goal for the 4th set, and then decrease the preceding 3 sets accordingly to adjust. So there's effectively a 25% decrease in the weight that we're lifting as well. So it's kind of like a deload for the muscle and a little bit of a reprieve on the aerobic side. So this is a rollback week, and that's why I'm not going to be necessarily testing for strength gains and stuff like that and progressions. I'm going to enjoy kind of a little bit of a rollback. So that's it. This is it for week 5. On to week 6. Thank you so much for joining me in the Ironman Florida 70.3 endurance athlete journey. I'm your host, Coach Justin. I'm the head coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing. If you go to Tabula Rasa Racing and go to the page that's dedicated to Ironman Florida 70.3, you'll find all these videos. You'll find all of my workouts, both in just the pictures that are there and in downloadable PDF form. So if you would like them, you can have them. They're free of charge. If you have any questions, please leave a comment to the videos. These are on YouTube, but I'm also hosting them on the website, but it takes you to YouTube. If you have questions, feel free to drop a comment in there. If there's something that you would like for me to talk about in some future videos or a little bit of a Q&A, I'm happy to accommodate. I'll work those in. Feel free to reach out to me directly through the website. There's an instant messaging kind of thing where you can send me a message or you can send me an email. All of my contact information is out there. So again, thank you. Thank you for the time that you spent listening, and I look forward to talking with you again next week in week 6. So I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I will see you all again soon. Good night.